The music suddenly came to a dead stop. Not because the DJ pressed pause, but because my husband's scream was so loud and violent that it sucked every bit of air out of the ballroom. In one single moment, all 300 guests, the city's rich, polished elite, turned their heads toward the entrance at the exact same time. It felt unreal. Crystal glasses hung frozen halfway to people's lips. Conversations were cut off mid-sentence. Laughter disappeared instantly, replaced by a silence so thick and heavy, it felt like you could hear your own heartbeat echoing in your chest. And there they were. My parents stood quietly near the doorway, wearing their old coats, holding a small gift wrapped in plain paper. My heroes. The two people who had sacrificed their entire lives so I could have a future better than theirs. The people who worked endless days under the burning sun so I could go to school. The people who gave up comfort, sleep, and security just to give me one opportunity. And standing right in front of them was Sergio, my husband. Or at least the man I had spent 10 years sleeping beside. But in that moment, staring at his twisted face flushed with alcohol and anger, he looked like a complete stranger. Worse than a stranger, he looked like a monster. "Get out!" he shouted, pointing toward the door like my parents were stray animals that had wandered inside by mistake. "Nobody invited you here. You smell like a farm, and you're destroying the entire atmosphere of my party. Out!" I watched my father slowly lower his head, embarrassed in front of hundreds of people, while he held onto that tiny gift box against his chest, like it was the only thing keeping him standing. I saw my mother shaking nervously, desperately searching for my eyes through the crowd. And right then, something inside me broke forever. Every ounce of love I still had for Sergio disappeared. The patience, the loyalty, the years of silence and submission, all of it burned to ashes in a matter of seconds. But something else rose in its place. A cold kind of rage. Calm, sharp, calculated. Sergio thought he was just throwing unwanted trash out of his glamorous party. What he didn't realize was that with that single humiliating moment, he had just signed the papers for his own destruction, socially, financially, and personally. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly how I turned the worst humiliation of my life into the most satisfying revenge anyone in that room could have imagined. So if someone has ever made you feel small, worthless, or beneath them, stay with me. Because what happened next felt like justice in its purest form. But to really understand why that night became my breaking point, you need to know how our story started. Sergio and I weren't always surrounded by wealth and luxury. When we first met, we were just two broke college students at a public university trying to survive. He was charming back then, ambitious, funny, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone like him within minutes. But he had absolutely nothing to his name. I came from a humble farming family. My parents spent their entire lives working the land from sunrise until dark. They sacrificed everything they had for me. In fact, they even sold the last acres of family land just to pay for my architecture degree. When Sergio and I got married, he held my hands and promised me something I never forgot. He said he would always respect where I came from. He promised he would never look down on my family. But money doesn't transform people the way we like to believe. It simply magnifies the person they already are deep inside. 5 years ago, I started my own eco-architecture company. And that's when everything began to change. My company exploded faster than I ever imagined. Within a few years, the business was bringing in millions. And suddenly, we were living the kind of life people only dream about. But I made the mistake a lot of women make when they're deeply in love. I trusted the marriage more than I trusted myself. Even though I was the one who built the company from the ground up, I allowed Sergio to become the public face of it. I let him carry the CEO title because I didn't want to damage his pride. Deep down, I knew his ego was fragile, and I kept telling myself that supporting him was part of being a good wife. Eventually, Sergio stopped pretending. He started believing the success belonged to him. The old Sergio slowly disappeared. Suddenly, he was obsessed with expensive Italian suits, luxury watches, private clubs, and rich people who cared more about appearances than loyalty. The friends we once laughed with over cheap dinners were replaced by shallow socialites who measured human value by money and status. And little by little, my family was pushed further and further out of our lives. It's not the right environment for them, Laura. he would say, whenever I suggested inviting my parents somewhere. My business associates wouldn't understand people like them. And every single time I stayed quiet, partly because I loved him, partly because I was tired of fighting. I convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth swallowing my pain. But the night everything finally shattered was Sergio's 40th birthday party, a celebration I personally paid for from beginning to end. The mansion we rented for the event looked like something out of a movie. The catering was imported luxury cuisine. There was a live orchestra playing near the marble staircase, waiters carrying crystal trays, expensive flowers covering every table. Every tiny detail had been planned perfectly. And as a surprise, I invited my parents. They traveled 6 straight hours on a crowded bus just to be there for him. They even brought a small handmade gift wrapped carefully in plain paper. I honestly believed that maybe, just maybe, seeing them there on such an important night would remind Sergio of who we used to be. I thought his heart might soften for once. God, I couldn't have been more wrong. But before I tell you exactly how everything exploded that night, let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever stayed silent while someone disrespected the people you love? Just because you wanted to avoid a fight? That kind of silence eats you alive, little by little. If you know that feeling, then you already understand the kind of pain I was carrying inside me that night. And that's when I finally realized something. Respect is not something you negotiate for. The moment someone humiliates the people who sacrificed everything for you, there's no middle ground left anymore. Anyway, back to the party. Sergio marched straight toward my parents before I could even react. I was standing across the ballroom watching it happen in real time, completely frozen by how fast the situation was spiraling out of control. "Sergio, son," my father said gently, trying to greet him with kindness, but Sergio never even let him finish speaking. "Look at them," he snapped loudly. He pointed directly at my parents' dusty shoes and their simple clothes like they were something disgusting on display. "Just look at these people," he said to the guests around him. Then he waved his arm dramatically toward the ballroom filled with wealthy socialites dressed in designer outfits. "These guests paid thousands of dollars to attend this party. Do you seriously think they want 2 peasants showing up here and ruining the entire event?" The room instantly filled with whispers. A few of Sergio's fake rich friends quietly laughed under their breath, enjoying the humiliation like it was entertainment. Others looked uncomfortable. Some lowered their eyes because they still had enough humanity left to feel ashamed of what they were witnessing. My mother tried to calm the situation. "Laura, sweetheart, please don't—" But Sergio suddenly stepped between us and shouted over her voice. "Laura is part of high society now," he barked. "She doesn't belong with people like you anymore." Then he turned toward the entrance and screamed loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear him. "Security! Get these people out of my sight immediately!" 2 large security guards approached slowly, clearly uncomfortable with what they were being asked to do. Ironically, they were men I had personally hired and paid for myself. One of them hesitated before speaking carefully. "Sir," they're elderly people. "I don't give a damn," Sergio shouted back without a second of hesitation. "I pay your salaries to follow orders," Sergio snarled at the guards. "Throw them out right now, or both of you are fired." And that was it. That was the exact moment when something inside me went completely still. The music, the whispers, the clinking glasses, all of it faded into the background like the world had suddenly moved underwater. I watched one of the guards place his hand on my father's arm, and then I saw it. A single tear sliding slowly down my father's weathered face. That man standing there humiliated in front of hundreds of strangers was the same man who used to carry me across flooded roads on his shoulders when storms hit our town just so my shoes wouldn't get soaked on the way to school. The same man who wore old boots with holes in them for years because every extra dollar went toward my education. The same man who hadn't bought himself decent clothes in over a decade so I could afford textbooks, supplies, and a future. And suddenly, all the silence I had swallowed for years turned into something cold and dangerous. I started walking toward them, slowly. My heels struck the marble floor with sharp, steady echoes that cut through the ballroom. Clack, clack, clack. I didn't rush. I didn't scream. I walked with the calm confidence of someone who had finally reached their limit. When I reached my parents, I looked directly at the guard holding my father. "Let go of him," I said quietly. I didn't need to raise my voice. The room had gone so silent that even my whisper carried across the space, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. The guards immediately released my father and stepped back without arguing. They knew exactly who actually signed their paychecks every month. Sergio turned toward me wearing that same arrogant smile that used to make my heart race years ago. Now it made me physically sick. "Baby, relax," he said casually, laughing under his breath. "I'm just taking the trash out. Go back to the investors. You don't need to involve yourself in this." For a second, I simply stared at him. Really stared at him. I noticed the lines on his face I used to kiss when we were young and broke. I saw the custom-made suit hanging off his shoulders, the one I paid for with my money. I noticed the Rolex on his wrist, too, my anniversary gift to him. And standing there in front of me was no longer my husband. It was a stranger, a parasite hiding inside the shell of the man I once loved. "Trash?" I repeated, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear every word clearly. "Yes, sweetheart," he answered with fake patience, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. "Come on, be reasonable. They don't belong here. We'll talk about this later at home, all right? Right now, just smile. People are watching us." But I barely heard him anymore. I stepped past Sergio and moved closer to my parents. My mother was trembling so badly I could feel it when I touched her face gently with my hand. Then I took my father's rough, shaking hand and kissed it softly. "Dad," I asked carefully, ignoring Sergio completely, "what's in the box?" My father swallowed hard before slowly opening the small package with trembling fingers. "It's your grandfather's watch, Sergio," he said quietly. "We had it repaired for you. We know how much you love watches. Your mother and I sold our dairy cow to pay the watchmaker. We just wanted to give you something meaningful. Something with history behind it." My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt to breathe. I looked down at the box. Inside rested a beautiful antique gold pocket watch, carefully restored until it looked alive again. It wasn't valuable because of the gold itself. It was valuable because of everything it represented: family, sacrifice, love. Things Sergio had become too blind to recognize anymore. That watch wasn't just some old object pulled out of storage. It was part of my family's history. A priceless heirloom passed down through generations, carrying memories, sacrifice, and love inside every scratch and gear. My parents had trusted Sergio with something deeply personal, and he rejected it without even thinking twice. Sergio glanced at the pocket watch and laughed coldly. "That piece of junk?" he mocked loudly. "I'm already wearing a $20,000 Rolex, old man. Why would I want your used-up garbage?" And before anyone could react, he casually flicked his hand forward. The box crashed onto the marble floor. Glass exploded everywhere. Tiny shards scattered across the ballroom under the lights like broken stars spread across ice. The sound echoed through the room. But to me, it wasn't just the sound of glass breaking. It was the sound of my marriage finally dying. The final crack in a relationship that had been rotting beneath the surface for years. The ballroom fell silent again. No music, no whispers, nothing. My father slowly bent down, his old hands shaking as he tried to gather the shattered pieces from the floor. Without saying a word, I knelt beside him and carefully helped collect every fragment. My fingers trembled while I picked up the watch itself. The glass face was cracked badly, but somehow the mechanism inside was still alive. Tick, tick, tick. Each tiny sound felt strangely powerful, almost like the watch itself was counting down to something inevitable. That steady rhythm matched the feeling growing inside my chest. Not sadness anymore. Resolve. The silence inside the ballroom became unbearable. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath seconds before a bomb exploded. I stood up slowly. I wiped away the single tear that escaped down my face and inhaled deeply, letting the anger settle into something calm and dangerous. "Sergio," I said firmly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room with enough force to make people straighten in place. "What now?" he snapped impatiently, clearly irritated that I wasn't simply obeying him. "Tell them to leave already." I stared directly into his eyes. "Give me the microphone." For the first time that night, he looked confused. "The microphone?" he repeated. "Yes," I answered calmly. "I want to make a birthday toast." The room shifted instantly. Sergio relaxed and smirked, convinced he had regained control. In his mind, I was still the obedient wife who would smooth everything over and protect his image, no matter how badly he behaved. "That's my girl," he said proudly. "Go on. Say something nice about me." Then he handed me the wireless microphone, and without realizing it, he handed me the weapon that would destroy him. I walked slowly toward the center stage while the orchestra quietly stopped playing. It almost felt like the musicians sensed the atmosphere changing before anyone else did. 300 people watched me in complete silence. Every eye in the ballroom followed me. I took a slow breath. The air smelled like expensive perfume, polished marble, fake smiles, and pure hypocrisy. "Good evening, everyone," I began clearly, my voice echoing through every corner of the ballroom. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate my husband Sergio's birthday." Out on the dance floor, Sergio lifted his glass proudly with a smug smile on his face, soaking in the attention like he always did. He still had no idea what was coming. Then I continued. A little calmer. A little colder. "Sergio just informed everyone that my parents, the two people who gave me life, don't belong here tonight. According to him, they smell like poverty. According to him, they ruin the image and aesthetic of his party." An uncomfortable wave of murmurs spread across the room immediately. Guests exchanged nervous glances. Some shifted awkwardly in their seats. And that's when I noticed Sergio slowly lowering his champagne glass, his expression tightening as he realized the room was slipping out of his control. "And you know what?" I continued evenly. "He's absolutely right." The crowd froze again. My parents do not belong in a room like this. Sergio's confidence started returning for half a second, but then I finished the sentence. "They don't belong here because they are honest people." The tension became so thick you could almost touch it. My parents understand the value of sacrifice, loyalty, and real love. They spent their entire lives giving everything they had for someone else without expecting applause, status, or recognition in return. I looked directly at my mother and father. These are people who know what dignity looks like, and sadly, that makes them completely out of place in a room full of people pretending to be important. I stood there looking around that ballroom filled with rich smiles and fake admiration, and suddenly the truth hit me harder than ever before. People like my parents never belonged in a place like that, not because they were poor, but because they were honest, and honesty had absolutely no place at Sergio's party. I looked down toward him again, and I watched the exact moment his expression changed. That confident smile, the one that used to make me weak years ago, vanished completely from his face. His jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. Then he started marching toward the stage like a man desperate to stop a fire before it spread beyond control. "Laura," he hissed through clenched teeth, trying to keep his voice low enough so the guests wouldn't hear the panic creeping into it. "Get down from there right now. You're drunk." I looked straight at him without blinking. "I'm not drunk, Sergio," I answered calmly. "For the first time in years, I'm fully awake." And it was true. For the first time in our entire marriage, I saw everything clearly. Every humiliation, every excuse, every moment I abandoned myself just to protect his ego. My mind felt razor sharp. My heart was strangely calm. As Sergio tried climbing onto the stage, I lifted my hand and stopped him before he could get any closer. He froze. Then I continued speaking into the microphone. "Sergio keeps saying my parents didn't pay to be here tonight," I said evenly. "And technically, he's right." A few nervous laughs echoed weakly through the room. "But do you know who else didn't pay to be here?" I paused intentionally and looked directly at him. "Him." A loud gasp rolled through the ballroom all at once. The whispers immediately exploded louder than before. Guests leaned toward each other, murmuring behind raised glasses while Sergio stood frozen under the lights. I could practically feel the tension vibrating in the air. "This entire party," I continued, "the one that cost over $50,000, was paid for by me." I pointed calmly toward Sergio. "That Italian suit he's wearing? I bought it." Then I glanced toward his wrist. "And that Rolex he loves showing off, the one he used to mock my father, was also purchased with my money." People began staring openly now. No more pretending, no more polite smiles. I kept going. The mansion, the luxury vacations in Tulum, the sports car parked outside, the private clubs, the business dinners, every single part of the lifestyle Sergio pretends he built came directly from my bank account. Sergio's face turned crimson. Humiliation and fury twisted together across his expression so violently I barely recognized him anymore. I noticed something else, too. His rich friends had started slowly backing away from him. The same people who used to praise him were now looking at him with suspicion, embarrassment, even disgust, like sharks sensing blood in the water. Sergio suddenly lunged toward the stage again, completely losing control. "Shut up!" he barked. "You sound insane!" Then he pointed furiously toward the guards. "Security! Take the microphone away from her now!" But nobody moved. Not a single inch. The guards didn't even look at Sergio anymore. They looked at me, waiting. I gave them the smallest nod, and they stayed exactly where they were. That was the moment everyone in the ballroom finally understood the truth. Sergio loved telling people he was the genius visionary behind my architecture company. He enjoyed acting like some self-made businessman who built an empire with his own hands. But the people who actually worked around us knew better. The reality was embarrassingly simple. Sergio hadn't worked an honest day in over 5 years. His only real talent was spending my money while pretending it belonged to him. And the worst part? I had allowed it. Because I loved him. I kept feeding his ego, making excuses for him, ignoring every warning sign because I thought protecting the marriage mattered more than protecting myself. But tonight changed everything. Tonight he crossed the one line that could never be repaired. He humiliated the man who taught me how to walk, the man who sacrificed his entire life for mine without ever asking for recognition, praise, or repayment. I turned toward my parents again. Even after everything Sergio had done to them, they still stood there quietly with dignity in their eyes. That hurt me more than anger ever could. "Mom, Dad," I whispered softly into the microphone. My voice shook just slightly for the first time all night. "I'm sorry." My mother immediately started crying. "Forgive me for standing silent all these years. Forgive me for allowing this man to disrespect you, and forgive me for forgetting where I came from." I took a slow breath. "But that ends tonight." Then I turned back toward Sergio. He looked pale now, cornered. The judgment from the crowd was crushing him alive, and his precious social circle had already begun separating themselves from him like he carried some contagious disease. I stared directly into his eyes. "Sergio," I said calmly, "a few minutes ago you said you didn't want trash at your party." I paused long enough for the silence to become unbearable. Then I nodded slowly. "You know what? I completely agree." Then I slowly reached into my handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. I'd been carrying it around for weeks. Maybe deep down, I already knew this day would come. Inside were all the documents tied to our marriage, property papers, bank accounts, everything connected to the life Sergio thought belonged to both of us. I held the envelope up while the ballroom watched in complete silence. "This mansion," I said calmly, "is rented under my company's name." I looked directly at Sergio. "And the lease was canceled this morning. You have until midnight to remove your things." For a second, he just stared at me. Then panic hit him. "You can't do this," he shouted. "We're married. We share everything." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because it was disappointing. "Oh, really?" I asked softly. "Remember the prenup you signed years ago, the one you laughed about because we were broke?" His face changed instantly. "Well, now there's money," I said, lifting the envelope slightly. "And everything connected to my architecture firm belongs to me." The silence in the ballroom became unbearable. Then I looked him straight in the eyes. "As for what you contributed to this marriage," I paused, "the only thing you created was debt." Several guests reacted immediately. "And those debts, darling," I added coldly, "are entirely yours." Sergio turned toward the crowd, desperately searching for support. His rich friends, his golf partners, his business contacts. But nobody defended him. Some stared at their phones, others looked away awkwardly. No one wanted to stand beside a man who had just been exposed as a fraud living off someone else's success. Then I remembered the watch. "Oh, and one more thing," I said quietly. The entire room still heard every word. That pocket watch you threw on the floor tonight? I glanced at my father. He restored it himself with his own hands. Sergio swallowed hard. For the first time all night, I saw shame in his face. That watch carries more value in one small gear than you do in your entire empty soul. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then I stepped down from the stage. As I walked across the ballroom, the crowd silently moved aside for me. It felt like the room itself had already chosen sides. I walked over to my parents. Even after everything, they still stood there with quiet dignity no amount of money could ever buy. I took their hands gently. "Come on," I said softly. "Let's go home." For the first time that night, I smiled for real. I'm starving, and honestly, I want real food, not these tiny, expensive appetizers that taste like cardboard. My father let out a quiet, emotional laugh. Then I looked at my mother. "Mom, will you make tortillas for me when we get home?" Her eyes filled with warm tears as she squeezed my hand. "Of course, sweetheart." Together, we walked toward the exit while the ballroom watched in total silence. No music, no laughter, just the sound of my heels against the marble floor. Right before we reached the doors, Sergio shouted behind me. "Laura!" he screamed desperately. "You can't leave me like this! Everyone's watching!" I stopped for a moment and slowly turned around. The man standing there no longer looked powerful. He looked small, broken, pathetic, like someone who had destroyed his own life with arrogance. "You're right, Sergio," I said calmly. "I never should have allowed you to treat me this way." I paused, holding his gaze. Then I gave him the same words he gave my parents. "So now, you get out. You're the one who doesn't belong in my future." And with that, I walked away for good. We left the mansion behind, the fake smiles, the luxury, and the man I once thought I loved. I helped my parents into the car, and we drove off in silence. Later that night, we stopped at a small roadside restaurant. We laughed, cried, and shared real food together. And honestly, I hadn't felt that free in years. But the story didn't end there. Real revenge doesn't happen overnight. Real revenge is watching life slowly return the consequences someone earned. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. That prenup Sergio once laughed about ended up saving me completely. He tried to fight it, but without my money, he couldn't even afford the lawyers he needed. And all those rich friends he loved so much, they disappeared the moment they realized he no longer had access to my lifestyle. Without me, everything around him collapsed. He sold his designer suits, lost the luxury car, which was legally in my name, and was left drowning in debt from credit cards he secretly opened behind my back. One afternoon, after leaving my office, I saw him standing across the street at a bus stop. At first, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, older, completely broken down by life. It was Sergio. Our eyes met for a moment. I could see regret written all over his face. He took a small step toward me, maybe wanting to apologize, maybe hoping for help. Just then, my driver opened the car door. "Mrs. Laura, everything okay?" I looked at Sergio one last time. I saw the loneliness, the failure, the emptiness, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. "Yes," I answered calmly. "Everything is perfect." Then I got into the car and never looked back. Today, my parents live with me in a beautiful house I designed just for them. My father spends his mornings growing tomatoes in the garden, and my mother takes care of her roses with a smile on her face. My grandfather's watch sits proudly in the living room, reminding me every day what truly matters. And I learned something important through all of this. Family is not something you hide to impress other people. Family is what carries you when the rest of the world lets you down, and anyone who asks you to choose between them and your roots never deserved a place in your life to begin with.